Welcome to Integrated. This is the podcast where we seek to bridge the gap between the intellect and the will so that we can grow as disciples of Christ, surrendering all that we are and all that we have to the truth. Hey guys, welcome back to another live stream on Integrated. My name is Angela Erickson. Thank you for joining me this evening. I started doing more live streams instead of pre-recording because it's just too much time to edit, if I'm being totally honest. And so you're just going to get more live shows, and I hope you guys are okay with that. As you know, please like, share, subscribe. We have a really awesome interview lined up. I'm excited to invite onto the podcast the one and only Mr. Catholic Comedy. You may have seen him all over Twitter. He usually has some good puns and things like that. And you know, many of my followers are very familiar with Jeff the Supreme Pontiff, but you have a little bit of competition. So anyway, thank you so much for coming on here this evening, Mr. Catholic Comedy.
Thank you. Comedy is not a competition. See, comedy is about collaboration. So Jeff the Pontiff, well, he and I may have some differences in what constitutes a good pun. We are not in competition with each other. We are the same. We have the same goal.
You have the same goal.
Yes, yes, we do.
That's so funny. Okay, so I have to ask. Well, maybe I should ask you first. Can you tell us a little bit more about you? Because you sort of exist under this almost anonymous space. Like, I would love to learn more about you and your family. You just had another baby, didn't you?
Yes, I did. No, I can't say anything about me because I'm in the witness protection program, as you're aware.
Yes.
I saw some stuff that I shouldn't have seen. No. So my name is Steven. I call my Catholic Comedy as kind of, I have an ego. And so if I see my name plastered around places, then it's just going to stroke that ego, and I don't want to deal with that. So as an exercise in humility, I try to not put my name out there as my name. The idea behind Catholic Comedy is that anybody could do it, and that someday I'll pass the baton on to somebody else who also could do it. And so that's why it's one of the reasons why it's under the moniker of Catholic Comedy. It's not me going out there, but Catholic Comedy as this kind of brand that we can utilize going forward. That's part of it. But I am, my name is Steven. I am married. Been married for about 10 years now. We just celebrated our 10-year anniversary in February. And I have 7 kids and 3 more who didn't make it. So a total of 10.
I'm so sorry.
I still count them. I say, I get in trouble for this, but I say that they're in limbo because I don't know, and I'd rather presume than, it's like presume and pray than it is to presume salvation. That's just my deal.
Yeah, no, I am not opposed to that. We lost one in between our 2 oldest, and I was recently on a retreat with Tim Flanders. Tim Flanders and the team over at Meaning of Catholic. And we were all hanging out discussing this issue because Tim has been pretty open about his wife's own miscarriages and things like that. And so we started sharing our own stories. And I said, I kind of think that I'm totally open to whatever the right answer is, obviously. But I suspect that miscarriage happens, that God permits it, and he does welcome them into heaven, because I simply cannot imagine heaven without the laughter of children and infants. And so personally, that's just how I feel about it. I've been a pro-life activist for a long time too, so I don't know if that sort of like shapes how I view this, but I just can't imagine heaven without those sweet little baby laughs and those giggles. So I'm praying for you guys. That's tough, and for anyone else who's listening, maybe who has experienced that. I hope that maybe gives you something to think about or provides some consolation, but also please remain resigned to whatever the truth is.
Yes,
I feel like I have to say the caveat.
Well, so I actually did a sketch about this a while ago, and it was so what I say is that the babies are in Mary's garden, and one of the things that I think about is that, like, you need baptism in order to not be basically completely destroyed in the presence of God. That's the reality of it, is that baptism is what cleans you, and then you go through purgatory. And the reason we go through purgatory is not because God is mean, but because we can't stand in his presence with any blemishes on our souls. Otherwise, terrible pain and death. And so that's why I think that, and this is personal belief, not church doctrine,
Mhm.
that the limbo is the, people say hell without fire, but I would say just this place outside, and that's where I imagine Mary spends most of her time, because she would spend her time with the children with the children that didn't make it, and just giving them comfort, because she can, and like, you can't be in the presence of God without baptism, but she can go she can go into this place without the potential of the pain and discomfort that they might experience, some potentially having original sin and blah blah blah. I don't know how it all works out, but it's just the
Really
thought I have. And if I'm wrong, feel free to never correct me on that.
Yeah. That's funny. Okay, so you have just this beautiful, lovely family, and I have to say, I like your skits with your wife too. They're hilarious. I actually want to play one here later.
Yeah.
So at some point, when the moment is right,
Mhm.
we will play your skit on matchmaking, because I thought it was hilarious. And for those of you who sort of have been paying attention to the Twitter wars that are so endless in the Catholic Twitter corner, you will really appreciate this skit. So hang tight until we play that and you get a taste of Stephen's Catholic comedy. So what made you decide to start doing this? I feel like I have to ask that as well. Like, who decides to start doing skits on the side like this, audio?
So okay, so it all starts at so we start at the beginning, which is the pandemic. Pandemic occurs. What happens to all the Catholic conferences? Canceled, but they don't really get canceled. They go virtual. So what you had before was this realm where you would go to a Catholic conference, you would listen to somebody talk about how the world is doomed and everything is terrible. And then afterwards, you would go and you'd converse with your fellow Catholics and you'd have a good time, talk about things. And then you go back in to hear about the terrible things in life. And then you would spend more time conversing with your fellow Catholics. So there was like this mixture of like joy, the joy of being with your fellow Catholics, along with the doom and gloom that came with going to the conference. All the conference went virtual. What does that mean? There's no after, right? There's no like after show where you get to sit down and discuss. It's just, you sit there and you do a conference, and it's, talking head telling you why everything is terrible, why the world is ending, and why you should be scared. And there's no reprieve, right? And and like, we're sitting there, and and you watch the podcast, and all the podcasts are the same thing. It's why you should be scared and afraid. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to do a conference that is devoted to Catholic comedy, right? Where we can all get together and talk about humor and joy. So there's a friend of mine, and he was a former stand-up comic. He goes to church with me, and he said, here is this lady. She does Laugh for Hope, which is a great thing that they do to raise money for a pro-life pregnancy center, where they bring in a bunch of comedians to.
Wait! Laugh for Life.
Laugh for Hope.
Laugh for Hope. Okay. Sorry,
this is specifically an Arizona one.
In Arizona, okay. So there's something similar in Minnesota. Actually, one of my dear friends has Laugh for Life every February or so, and she runs 7 pregnancy centers. So all of a sudden, I was like, wait, what?
Different lady, possibly. So I call her and I say, I'm looking for Catholic comedians for my Catholic festival. And she said, do they have to be Catholic? I said, well, yes, it's a Catholic festival. And she said, Catholics aren't funny. So I went and I was like, you know what?
Differ.
I'm gonna I go online and I go and I buy CatholicComedy.com, and it cost me $12. So maybe she had a point. So, but yeah, that was the idea, is like, Catholics aren't funny. So I start Catholic comedy, and I know Catholics are funny. And I know that one of the big things that we don't get to see, and this is something that I've been doing with someone by the name of the Modern Papist. He says papist, but he's wrong. I say papist. Is he's not. Is well, one of the things we've been doing is like the after show, right? Where we don't do the actual podcast, we do the after show, where it's because what you don't see is that when someone goes on, let's say, Taylor Marshall's podcast. There's a 30 minutes beforehand and like an hour afterwards where they're joking and having a good time, and they're like they're going nuts, right? And they're enjoying each other's company, and that's what you don't see. What you see is, hey, the world is going to hell, everything is terrible.
Yeah,
There's heretics all over the place, and then the record light goes off, and they're starting to talk and chatting about their lives. So we
right,
kind of do
exactly.
this like that other piece. So I started doing this thing for this festival, which I do, and it's coming up January 6th is when we're going to have the next one. I've got to update the website and everything for it. That's my plan this week. But I started going on podcasts, and everyone was like, "Well, what do you do that's funny?" And I said, I don't. Do you do any stand-up? Like, no, I have a terrible stutter when I get nervous, so it wouldn't do well for me to do stand-up. So
what if God had asked Moses to do stand-up?
that is a good idea for a sketch. I'm writing that down. God.
See, women can be funny, right, Patrick Coffin? Just kidding. Right, Matt Brad?
Oh man. So I got a good story about that in a minute afterwards.
Okay.
So so people were asking me why people were giving me like, what do you do? What are you doing? And so I wanted to do something, and I looked out at there have been a couple of people who have tried to do Catholic skits, right? Catholic sketches, but they all kind of fall flat on their face because it's just a couple guys with a camcorder, and it's really difficult to make something good when it's cheap.
There is one exception, and maybe I'm biased, but I think my friend Enoch, the Catholic rapper, does a great.
He came
job
after
with
me.
his skits.
He came after me. Okay, so you know what?
He
But
did.
he started doing those a couple months ago, I think.
I don't know. He's been doing it for a few months now, but they're hilarious.
Definitely 100%. They're really good. So I listen to an audio sketch comedy group basically every single day because I find them funny, called Mitchell and Webb, and they have this they did video commentary or video sketch comedy, and they did audio sketch comedy, and I really like the audio sketch comedy. And they're not Catholic, and if you look at some of their sketches, a lot of it can be really scandalizing, so tread carefully.
Okay.
But they have some really good stuff on there. But it's like this idea, this lost form of art, which is radio and radio comedy. And you think about it, like there are so many things you can do audio style that you can't do if you have a camera. Like I can't reveal something that's been there the whole time in like a visual fashion, but I can do it via audio, right? Like I can like in an audio sketch, like I can be talking to you and then say, okay, so that's why you're wearing the pirate's hat, something like that. Like if it was a visual thing, you'd see the pirate's hat from the beginning,
right?
And the punch wouldn't land like that. So it's like, I could do stuff. We could have fun with it. And so I started out by just doing like a joke a day, and that didn't go very well. And then I was like, and then the first one that I really did as like a sketch was I was sitting with my wife. We watched these ghost shows. So wouldn't it be funny to do like Father Ripperger goes it's like Father Ripperger tours these haunted houses, and all he does is he exorcises them and then walks out, and it's like, yeah, no, it wasn't a big deal. I was just, yeah, it was a portal to hell. I took care of it. No, etc.
That is his voice. That's funny.
So I thought that would be funny. So I made that one.
On haunted houses.
Well, so on haunted houses is more recent one. So that was
that one was pretty recent. I was gonna say
that one has Paul Rugg.
Yes, Paul Rugg. Yes.
Who is a Catholic. I was very surprised and very.
Wait,
anyway,
Paul Rugg is like a real person.
Paul Rugg.
Paul Rugg is a real human. I thought it was a riff on Paul Rudd.
No, Paul Rugg is he's one of the writers for Animaniacs. And he also was one of the writers and the voice of the Freakazoid. If you watched that show in the 90s, he also worked on a number of different shows. He's won several Emmys, but he's like a legitimate like a comedy writer, and
That's
so
funny.
and voice actor. And so he helped us out. But he's on that Unhaunted House one, which was something I stole from someone on Twitter. But yeah, so it was a lot, this idea that you can do sketches without the visual, and that makes it a lot cheaper to do as well, because you can do whatever you want and you don't have to show anything. You just have to say things. So
Yep. No, I enjoy it. I mean, I do a radio show every week, locally here for our local Twin Cities Relevant Radio affiliate. And you're right. I mean, it's just a different animal altogether. And I do think we need to sort of reclaim that. I talk a lot on here about how we reclaim the culture and make the culture Catholic again. And I think these different forms, I really appreciate them. I was a theater kid and did competitive speech and things like that. So maybe it's the nerd in me, but I love it. Like, I love this stuff. So it's fun to hear what you're doing.
I'll sign you up for a sketch if you want to do a sketch. That's what I'm trying to do this year.
That would be so much fun.
One of the things I'm trying to do with this season, so to speak, is to have guests on, like just people from Twitter or whatnot that I've spoken to. That's like, hey, do a voice, jump in, have some fun. So
yeah, I would love that. Okay, so one thing I think we both sort of connected on recently, and part of the impetus for this show is I think there's just so much negativity in Catholic discourse right now. And I mean, sure, I've been a part of it. I think I try not to be. I'm sure I've been part of it before, though.
We all have.
I think we all have, because we can't totally ignore it, right? Like, the world is kind of on fire right now, and so is the church. But I don't think it's necessarily helpful to fixate on that and fixate and constantly pointing the finger at everyone else. Like, everyone else is a problem. The church is a problem. Everything, whatever. Instead, that finger wagging that we see all the time. And I sort of feel like we need to spend more time growing in virtue and focusing on our own faith life. And I think that seemed to resonate with you recently. What are your thoughts on that, and how we can cultivate joy? And because it is this is a virtue. This is part of being virtuous, is to exude the joy of Christ. So what does that look like, and how do we cultivate that?
So I'm reminded, and this is just randomly reminded from what you're talking about, of something that Patrick Madrid said years and years ago. It had nothing to do with comedy, but had everything. So people would call into his show and they would complain about how he wouldn't say anything negative about Trump. That was the big thing. Like, he would he wouldn't talk about Trump in the ways that, and so his response was, if you want to hear that, it's literally everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to come here for that. You come here for something different. I remember that was like something that I listened to at it was a random thing where I had the radio turned on to Relevant Radio, and it was just something that came up, and it had come up a couple times. But it's the idea here is that if you want sadness, anger, depression, all of that, man, you are spoiled for choice as to who you could go talk to. Yeah. So I used to have 2 Twitter accounts. I had Catholic Comedy, and I had one that I used to fight about politics, because I was really involved in fights about politics.
You're a keyboard warrior. That's exciting.
I was. It's
addicting, though, I think, for people.
What I would do, so the way that I got out of it, what I would do is I would wait 10 minutes before posting a response and look to see if somebody else had posted the same thing that I was going to say. And if they did, I was off the hook. I didn't have to say it. The thing got said and I could walk away.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Somebody else was making the argument. It's not my ego versus somebody else's ego. It's the argument was made.
That had to be an exercise in restraint, though. That's hard. That's really hard.
It is, but that's how I started it out.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's that I don't have time for it, and so it's very disconnecting to not engage, because that's what the people want. Right.
That's what people want. And that's what the apps are designed for.
Right.
Like, let's be real. We are all being manipulated by social media to be constantly engaged. And there's something to be said about like cultivating rage, because there's more interaction and engagement when people are angry with each other. So there's actually an incentive for social media companies to introduce you to things that they know are going to make you mad.
Yep.
Like, that's how that works. And then they
Yeah.
get boost ad revenue. That's a whole nother thing. They are incentivized to actually divide us.
Well, and since now people are getting a share of that ad revenue,
It's so much worse.
it incentivizes people to continue to do the bad things. Now, that all being said, I'm not saying that there aren't bad things, that we shouldn't talk about those bad things. I'm saying that there are plenty of people who will go around and who you can talk to about those bad things. And I don't need to be one of them. But it does, if you refuse to engage in that discussion, like not just you just kind of don't, but you refuse to engage, then it is kind of ostracizing, because you're not part of that group. Because that's like I'm on a couple Telegram Telegram chats and whatnot, and it's all the same stuff over and over and over and over and over again. It's like, it makes you feel very disconnected when you're like, I just don't want to right now. I want to talk about literally anything else, and that's all everyone wants to talk about. So I do my little thing, and I don't take the world seriously, I suppose you could say. So in preparation for this, I actually, there's a great Fulton Sheen divine humor speech that he gave in the 1950s, where he talks about what humor really means. And the difference between, like he says, a humor is beyond just the comical. Humor means the ability to see through things. Like a humorist sees the world like a window. You don't see things as solid or as important as everyone thinks that they are. You can see things. If you're trying to have a sense of humor is the ability to kind of just see through and to not worry so much about it, to see beyond it, to see the divine and not to see the profane. And so that's what I work on, is to try to see beyond the mundane, because the mundane is what's happening all around us. Politicians are corrupt. Bad things are happening. There's evil everywhere. You have to see beyond it. You can't take this world seriously, because if you do, you lose yourself in it. And so he says, humorists have a particular instinct into the unseen. They pierce our foibles, relieve our tensions. They take away the seriousness of life, even in serious moments. And that hits me pretty hard. So the Haunted Mansion movie came out, and I've been talking about this to anyone who's willing to listen. And I went to see it because I love the Haunted Mansion ride in Disneyland. I love it. I have back over on my wall. There's like the original blueprint that I have hanging up there.
Oh wow!
I'm a huge fan because it's all the different like lighting tricks and everything, and it was a really brilliant build. The new movie comes out. I go to see it. I expect bad things. It was probably one of the best movies I've ever seen.
Really?
In the way that it tackles this idea of humor and grief. And there is a scene that captures this perfectly. And which is how we should really kind of think about our lives, and how funerals really go well if you've been to a good funeral. I know that it's hard to say a good funeral, but with a lot of people who love each other at a funeral. There's a man who's talking about how his wife was driving to go get some tater tots, and then she went to go get ice cream, and she got in a car crash and died. And everyone is talking about, and so he talks about how he thinks that she died not knowing that he loved her, because the last thing was an argument over whether or not he would go with her to get the tater tots. And so everyone around is saying, it's not your fault. Of course she knew you loved her. And then Danny DeVito's character is like, tater tots, then ice cream? What was the cholesterol in this lady?
Oh my!
Right? I mean, I don't want to say anything mean, but I don't think she was long for this world to begin with. And then everyone busts up laughing, because that's the kind of thing that happens when you're able to really work through grief with people that love you and that you love, is that the grief there's a doorway from grief and from fear and from anger into joy that you have to be courageous enough to step through, that you have to let go of all of the attachments that you have to all of the baggage that you have, right? So you're talking about like fear. We like fear because it's comforting, because we're used to it, right? You have to let go of that, and then you can walk your way into joy. Right? And
yeah, that's a really interesting thought. I haven't thought so much about this relationship even between grief and humor, because there actually, I have to agree with you, there is. And I think it's also interesting, kind of part of my podcast, the whole idea behind integration, but laughter is literally healing for our bodies. I find that just amazing that God included this mechanism within us, that laughter and that feeling of connection and joy. Experiencing that in laughter is actually very healing for the very person. And so when you connect that with grief, I'm just thinking, of course, of I don't know if you know this, but I have a sister that passed away in a car accident 8 years ago now. Is it 8 years ago? 7 years ago, 7.5 years ago. And one of my favorite things is to talk with people who knew her, or even share with people who didn't know her, but tell funny stories about her. It's one of my favorite things to do. It helps bring her back to life for me. And it's a way of bringing people together in a way that's not awkward.
Right.
Because sometimes, especially like when grief is really fresh and you want to talk about them, I found that nobody wanted to give me the space to do that. It made them too uncomfortable. And so even when I wanted to share about her, I felt like I couldn't, because people would just stop talking, or they'd go silent, or they would change the subject altogether. But when you're talking with relatives, it's very natural to talk about funny stories. Like my twin sister is getting married this December. And her future husband is a carpenter. He builds houses, and he looks like a lumberjack. He's got a huge beard and the whole bit. And so I was like, okay, we're in Minnesota. Why don't we go to Paul Bunyan Land for for like your little bachelorette get together? Let's go to Paul Bunyan Land, look at Babe the Blue Ox, get pictures, and dress up as lumberjacks. I think that would be so funny. And she loved it. But my late sister was over 6 feet tall, and one time we teased her for being Paula Bunyan. And so it's like little stuff like that. I mean, it's like, okay, this just brings it all together for us. It incorporates our late sister in a funny way, and then it ties together all this other stuff that's going on with her wedding and her fiance and everything. So you're right, it's just amazing the way that grief can sort of be quelled by laughter. And healed of that. So thank you for sharing that. That was beautiful.
Well, I mean, that's like, you have to go through, like, you have to go through the door, right? And you have to make it there. Like, okay, if you are staying focused on the fear and the anger and the sadness, you're not going to make it. And I don't want to say that in like a way to scare your listeners or anything, but it's true. If you are so attached to the things of the world, you're not going to make it. Jesus is joy and love and forgiveness. And you think about those things are the antithesis of what we focus on. We focus on fear and sadness and hatred, right? And Jesus is the antithesis of all those things, right? So we have to find a way out of it. And joy and humor is a great coping mechanism. That's like, doctors have a really dark sense of humor because that's how you cope with the realm that you are in, right? And like,
I think that's why the Irish are so funny. Like, so maybe I'm biased. I'm Irish, and I think we're hilarious. Very dry humor. It's so good. It's so good.
There are a lot of different humor styles out there. I think the current American humor style is much worse than the prior American humor style.
How would you describe those?
Okay, so
let's hear it.
Mark Twain had a brilliant essay on how to tell a story, and he talks about the difference between, at the time, the European nobility and the Americans, and now it's kind of switched. But so in the European nobility, they would tell a story in which they were so smart, so much smarter than the poor doof that they're telling the story about, right? But if the American tells that same story, the doof that they're talking about isn't actually the one that's stupid. It's the person who's telling the story. They take on a character of someone who's funny. So that's where you get so you have I think a great example of this kind of in more contemporary is like Brian Regan, right? He's clearly very intelligent. To be able to write the jokes that he writes, to make fun of his own stupidity, he has to be smart enough to know, what the dumb thing would be. But he plays the fool. And so you get this great thing. It's fun for everyone. You sit there, you can laugh at him, and he's laughing at himself because he's saying he's dumb, and he's performing like he's a dumb person. But
my grandpa was like that, and he was just one of the funniest people I've ever met.
Right. Yeah. It's the person who plays the fool, right? It's like in all of my sketches that I've put out there, I never play the intellectual. There's always somebody else who's the intellectual who's making fun of me. Right? I'm always the one, the bumbling fool, because that's funnier, and because you write yourself as the bumbling fool. Also, if you write yourself as the cool, calm intellectual, then you're not
with the mature voice,
right?
Like I heard that skit too. I don't sound like that, Paul Rugg.
When you write yourself as the cool, calm, collected person, then it's not as funny because it just sounds like you're an egoist. And that's what the problem is with modern comedians, is that most of them are showcasing how they are better than everyone else. That's, you go to a comedy show now, and it's an hour and a half long lecture on that person's particular politics. And it doesn't matter in the left or the right. They're both doing the same exact thing. It's not, no one's going up there saying, man, was I dumb? They're saying, man, are the other guys dumb? Let me tell you exactly what you want to hear, because I'm going to sit there and insult them for 30 or for an hour and a half. Not all comedians are like that. We had at the last festival, we had Jeremy McClellan. He was really good. He had some really good, funny moments. Funny stand-up stuff. It was great. I loved it. We loved having him. But yeah, the real good comedians see themselves as a fool, and I think because of World War II and how bad that was for Europe, the Europeans kind of went into that mentality for a while, and so some really good British humor out of the the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, is all about how the British think that they're so great, but they're actually not. They're actually foolish. You have Rowan Atkinson is great at that. He plays a guy who is a fool, right? And is always doing these foolish things. He's playing these foolish characters. And even his Blackadder character that he played is still a fool, but he's a fool who thinks that he's grander, right? So you contrast that to most the American humor that's come out in the last couple of years. It's always about how much better I am than everyone else, and I'm playing this role. I'm not playing a fool because I can't play a fool, because that would be too detrimental to me, right? And so that's
so interesting. That's really true. It's funny that you say that too, because I think even Jim Gaffigan, when he first started, was hilarious, and then the bigger he got, the more political he got, the less funny he was. He's not funny anymore. I was so excited one time my husband bought us tickets to go see him, and I remember leaving the theater and being like, did we just spend a lot of money on that? Because that wasn't funny. That just was not funny.
Kevin James has probably some of the best stand-up out there. His most recent special, it's on Netflix, so I didn't see it on Netflix. I kind of listened to it in through other means because I don't have Netflix anymore. But it was actually really a lot of really great moments in that. He still does play the fool really well, and whenever he does, whenever he's in a show or a movie or something like that, he's always playing the fool. So he understands that, and he's actually a really deeply Catholic man. He doesn't talk too much about it like
Yeah, he serves at the
publicly.
traditional Latin Mass. I think that's
Mhm.
just amazing.
And and on top of that, he was, so his co-star from King of Queens, I forget her name, but she was supposed to try to convert him to Scientology. She was told to convert
Oh
him to
boy.
Scientology. He converted her, not because he was the greatest theologian, but because he was kind and he was funny and he was loving. Right? It's like,
He seems like he'd just be a big teddy bear. Like,
right.
yeah.
It's few people are converted by lectures and street preachers. More people are converted by love and stories
And beauty.
and beauty.
Yeah. And that's where I think we're falling short in the constant negative discourse. It's not beautiful. Like, there's nothing attractive. Nobody's sitting there listening to all this stuff and going, I really want to be Catholic. Like, I think unless they're highly intellectual and they can make distinctions, they can see that we're talking about an institution and certain people, and that doesn't necessarily mean that this institution was not created by Christ. Like, you have to be that person who's willing to make all those distinctions. But I can't what saint is it that says that more people are attracted with honey than vinegar? Saint John Vianney, maybe.
Potentially.
But yeah, I mean, I sort of think about that a lot. That's part of why my logo has the honeycomb hexagon. It's like I want to be attractive and sweet so that we can have hard conversations, but I like always pointing back to the truth, beauty, and goodness of the Catholic faith, not constantly denigrating people in the church or our faults, because we all have them. I have another question, kind of
Go
looking
ahead.
I'm looking at Mac brought up how Chris Farley was Catholic and hilarious, and that he struggled but had a very sweet heart. It's really common for comedians to be depressed. Why is that?
Like I said, humor is a good way to get through that grief and trauma, and some people don't get all the way through it. Like, so the problem is, so you start out like, and this is a common joke with a lot of comedians. I've seen it a lot of times in a lot of different stand-ups, which is it was like, do this or go to therapy, and this was cheaper, right? And so that's kind of the joke, because it's like, it's in that it's difficult to constantly be funny. It's difficult to not be allowed to not be funny at the same time, like that type of deal. And it's part of it. And I think also it's just when you be not. I don't think that the people who are depressed comedians are not the ones who are like languishing in obscurity. I think those guys probably have a lot more joy. It's success that drives you to depression, because I, like, once you become a successful person, you have to maintain it, right? And it can be tiring.
That's really hard when your outlet is naturally creative. Like a comedy is a creative outlet, and so it's not just punching numbers in. You have to feel inspired to create. And if you're not feeling inspired and you go through a dry spell, which you just naturally do, writers do, I do, just doing podcasting and commentary, it's really hard to keep up with that. I could see what a challenge that would be, especially when people expect you to be the funny guy all the time.
Right. And so you go to a party, you're not feeling up to it, but you have to put on the face. And then that just makes you feel like, and then you feel like none of your friends are your friends. They're only friends with the funny guy that you pretend to be. And it's kind of this really difficult process to go through. And I mean, we all go through it at some point. I mean, I have my moments as well, when it's like, why am I brooding? Well, why am I doing what I'm doing? My last sketch got 20 views or something like that. So why am I doing this? Why am I spending the time and the energy to create this stuff? And nobody cares for it. And then when you're a secular comedian, you don't even have that, like, I'm doing this for a good cause. Like, I'm doing this for a paycheck. And when you start doing something for a paycheck, it like, my advice to any podcaster that I talk to is that be very careful about making money off of this, because once you start making money off of this, it becomes your job. Then you have to do things to maintain the job. you have to book guests you don't want to book because you have to, because that's who's popular right now. You have to take opinions you don't want to take, but you have to because that's the opinion that is popular right now. Like there becomes this pressure on you, and I think a lot of comedians have to deal with that. And some of them are broken and try to use comedy as a way to get out of that brokenness, but they never actually heal. They're just constantly trying to mask
a band-aid. Yeah,
right. It's this, like, the healing comes from the confession booth, right? And then afterwards you can laugh about what a sinner you were, right? And then when you fall, you get back to the confession booth, and then you can laugh about the foolish things that you have done. And if you don't have that, and at the same time you're dealing with the pressures of fame and all that, like it can get daunting, right? Who can you trust? Who's actually there to be with you, and who's there to take advantage of you? You know, and like, do you have friends? And then you get betrayed by someone, and we've all been betrayed by someone, some of us by the same person. And you have to deal with, now you have a trust issue on top of it all. It's not just that, you're trying to be funny, you're trying to do the right thing, but somebody comes up to you and you're like, okay, do you actually like what I'm doing? Or are you just going to use me until you can get more popular than me and get rid of me? Can I trust you? Should I try to trust you? It's like, there's a lot of complicated things to it. I think in any sort of performance art, it's not just comedy, right? It's any kind of performance art, any kind of creative art. It's like you're trying to express yourself in a way. And then if something catches on, it's the Bart Simpson meme, say the line, right? It's say the line. Just shut up and say the line. It's like, if you're creative, if you want to express your creativity, but you're typecast, or you just can't get out of it, and you do that. And then if you do try to get out of it and it fails, then you have to deal with the fact that you are a failure without whatever crutch you were using before. So it's complicated. It gets complicated. It gets hard. And one of the things that you as a Catholic podcaster have to be especially careful of is to not care too much about what happens when you do the right thing. Doing the right thing is good in and of itself, and doesn't have to be what else occurs because of it. It's you do the right thing for the right reasons, and God will reward you. If you do the right thing for the wrong reasons, you've gotten your reward, and you won't get that fulfillment from God that you should be getting for doing the right thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think something that I had a friend recently ask me, and I thought she was kind of kidding, but I don't know that she actually was, but she asked me how I stayed humble doing this stuff. And first of all, it's like, my podcast is not that big, so it's pretty easy. It's pretty easy to stay humble. But even if it were bigger, like, one thing I think is really important when you start doing this, because we're all posting everything on social media, and what one of us wouldn't love something of ours to take off, right? Of course, that would be great. But I've always really been intentional about having a healthy detachment from my work, so that if God told me, Angela, you need to be done, then I'd be willing to do it. Then I would be willing to fold and just say, all right, God, to God be all the glory. I hope that this project that you put me out on, I hope that this bore the fruit you wanted it to, and just leave it at that. No tears shed, nothing. And I do feel that way. I feel like if I had to quit at any time, I would. And I think we all have to approach our work that way, especially when we're trying to build up the kingdom of God, but we're also having a public platform. And it sounds like you're doing a really good job keeping that distance. I mean, you're going the extra mile, even like not putting your name out there. That's like, that's amazing to me. What are some other things that, like, I guess, who are some comedians that you would recommend people listen to? Who do you get your inspiration from? And like, what is the best comedy you have ever seen?
So I think the funniest person, so the funniest person to have ever lived is Jesus Christ. And that's something we should know just inherently. If you read the Bible, there's so many jokes in there. And then the big joke that God plays on Satan in the end is hilarious if you really kind of think about it the way that. And we can go in more into that in a bit. But
Yeah, I would love to.
the funniest person that wasn't also God, is that you can look at the works of right now, is probably Stan Laurel from Laurel and Hardy. There was a guy who really just got humor, and is in a time when they went from like silent films to talkies, and he was great throughout all of them. Laurel and Hardy is probably the funniest comedy duo to ever have existed, and they did it all without being crass.
Yes.
It was all just, you can watch any of it. Like a lot of people talk about the Marx Brothers, and yeah, you know what? They had some really funny bits, but they also go through and watch some of their stuff. It's like, oh boy, it's like, oh, I forgot that this was in there, right? And so a lot of people like base their humor on like Groucho Marx, and Groucho Marx had good humor. And I watched the Marx Brothers and Laurel and Hardy and Jerry Lewis when I was a kid. I watched all those things because my father was really into them. And even though he's a jerk now, he sent me. There's a story there too. Anyway,
Okay.
so yeah, I mean, but like the old school comedy, there's a bit of a purity to it, and there's some people who really understood it and who could do it purely, without having to add in any of the bad stuff. And Laurel and Hardy are a perfect example of that, because none of their stuff that I've seen, at least, maybe there's some sort of lost episode or something, but none of it is morally questionable. It's just two dumb guys who it's Stan Laurel who's dumb, and Oliver Hardy, who is slightly less dumb than Stan Laurel, but they're both two dumb guys trying to do random stuff, and that type of thing. Some of the early Mickey Mouse cartoons are also really funny in that regard as well. The new stuff is much less because they don't understand it, but like there's a lot of comedic genius in there. Mark Twain obviously is a bit further back, but also very funny in the things that he would do. Fulton Sheen is one of the funniest people.
You're wearing a shirt with St. Philip Neri, if I'm
yeah.
not mistaken.
He is said to be. He said that he was very witty, but none of the records of the things that he said that were witty are things that you could easily find. So like he had a joke book, but
he had a joke book.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
So he would. So yeah, St. Philip Neri, because this is the St. Philip Neri Festival.
So for anyone listening, why should they look to St. Philip Neri as a funny saint? He is the patron of comedy, I'm assuming.
Patron saint of humor, not comedy, because there's a difference.
Humor. Okay.
Because the patron saint of comedy is St. Lawrence.
Oh.
And the patron saint,
because when he was burned alive, the
last thing he did was say right. The last thing he did was say a joke, and that is part of divine humor.
Yeah.
Is that he didn't take his death seriously, as many of us would have. He did not take his torture nor his death seriously, but saw the joy that was awaiting for him on the other side. He saw through the window so he could see the joy on the other side. That's St. Lawrence. St. Genesius is another one that he was a comedian, and he was doing a play on why Christianity was dumb. And in it, he did a fake baptism, and a fake priest baptized him in front of the emperor. And he converted at that moment. And in the middle of his play, he converts, he turns to the emperor, lambasts him for his treatment of the Christians, and is tortured and killed. So he is the patron saint of comedians, right? So like
that's amazing.
Any kind of actor. So on my saint necklace, I've got a Saint Genesius.
That's really
Saint
interesting.
Lawrence, and a Saint Philip Neri. So Saint Philip Neri medals are hard to come by. He's not as popular of a saint as he should be.
Really? That surprises me.
I know. I'm surprised me too, because I was looking.
Maybe we need to start a devotion. We need more joy.
We do need more joy. So Saint Philip Neri is said to be very witty. He was very filled with joy. He's the patron saint of joy, which is kind of crazy. You think he was in the 1600s or 1500s, and he's the patron saint of joy, while like there's so many saints that came before him that must have also been funny. And yes, there are jokes in the Bible.
Yeah, maybe we can dive into that a little bit around the time that we discuss Jesus being the ultimate comedian.
Okay, so so Saint Philip Neri, but so he did plays and stories and jokes, and he got people into the church in the same way that every generation, I say, has a Saint Philip Neri. We don't necessarily know who it is at any given time, but so Saint Philip Neri, he used love, kindness, the arts, and to bring people in, and he's said to have been very witty. Now, I don't know any jokes that he has said, and any books that he has written have been deeply theological and emotional, but not funny. So,
gee dang it! Come on.
But he did things that were funny to people.
He played jokes on people. Wasn't he kind of a prankster?
He was, and he would shave half of his beard off because of. So he was really devoted to humility. So that was his big thing, was humility.
He did things to make people laugh at him
and to laugh at themselves. So what he would do is he would take there was somebody who their penance was to wear a hair shirt outside of their clothing. Normally it would be to wear inside to cause you irritation, but you wear it outside to cause humiliation. And then he had to like go and like march to walk to like a very important meeting wearing this hair shirt on the outside of his clothing, and St. Philip Neri followed him to make sure he did it. And those are the kind of penances that he would give, is something that would humble you. And people, because he performed many miracles, people would come to see him. And so they would say, oh, they would think of him as like a new prophet, like, and they'd say things, oh, is the blessed man here? Like, oh, I don't know if the priest is here. And then he'd walk away. But he would shave half his beard. He would read jokes from a joke book. If he didn't read the jokes from a joke book, he would be so possessed by the Holy Spirit that he would levitate during Mass. And he found that to be distracting for the parishioners. So he did his best to not levitate, because he didn't want to distract the people from the Mass. Any miracles that he did, he always attributed to God. And like, he would always like very humbly say, I did nothing. But it's like, I think there's one of his followers who died, but asked for it to go to for confession for him before he died, but he didn't make it there in time. By the time he got there, he told the guy to wake up. The guy woke up. He took his confession, then he laid down and died again. So that whole thing happened, like that happened, but he didn't attribute it to himself. He said, oh, he must have just been sleeping, right? Like, but he was the guy was dead, and Saint Philip Neri told him to wake up, and he woke up.
That's amazing.
But he never accepted any of that. It's a big humility thing. But yeah, he is the patron saint of humor. But as we talked about earlier, humor is different, not necessarily comedy, but there's this whole abstraction, right? People think of humor and comedy being jokes, but humor is seeing beyond what is there and not taking things seriously. So joy is part of humor. You take things seriously that are important. Like the only thing so this is another thing that Fulton Sheen said, that Christ didn't take anything in this world seriously except for the salvation of souls. He wouldn't step on a speck of flax, which was part of like a candle, because there might be enough spark in there, like a spark in a person, to be able to turn into a flame. He wouldn't step on a discarded reed, because they used to use the reeds to make music. Like they'd take a reed and they'd put holes in it and they'd use it to make music, and then they would discard it if it broke. But he wouldn't step on the reeds because there may be a single note left in it that he didn't want to destroy, just like there may be a single note in our lives. And so it's all like this big metaphorical thing. But yeah, so comedy is beyond. I think that maybe people who have difficulty, or they struggle with depression while also being comedians, or that they don't see the comedy beyond it all. They see the jokes, and they put out the jokes, and they're trying to laugh at their pain. But yeah, I mean, there's
Okay. Do you know what a dead ringer is?
Well, there's a couple different like I know the term a dead ringer, but
Mac is wondering. I have no idea that is.
So, Go on.
No, you go ahead. I don't want to interrupt. Do you know what a dead ringer is? What is it? Are you Googling it quick?
I'm going to Google it now to see what it is. But a dead ringer to do.
Oh, well, I see.
An exact duplicate. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So it's because you would substitute a horse for another horse if one horse died. You would substitute one horse that would look exactly like the other horse.
That's really interesting. I'm just getting a bunch of horror movies when I Google it.
Yeah, no. So
not what I was expecting there.
No, so I mean,
I'm glad that you found the actual answer.
Yeah, and then there's the other thing that he's talking about, because I see the other comments, is that you would have like a bell above a grave, and so if somebody was buried alive, they could ring the bell, and they'd be dug up or whatever and saved. So.
Oh, that's really interesting. Wow. Okay. Oh, so let's talk about how Jesus is the best comedian. Like, I'm thinking of the story of Jesus. The woman is coming and asking for him to heal. Is it heal her daughter? And he's telling her, like, you don't give scraps to the dog. Like, you wouldn't feed the dog.
It's so no, that's I think you're conflating two stories, because that line, well, because the line is like, do not give what is, or do not give pearls to swine, and do not give what is holy to dogs, because I love this because it's one of my favorite things to quote at people on Twitter when they're engaging in fruitless arguments, which is you don't do it because you're wasting your energy and your time. But no, Jesus definitely had a sense of humor. So he renames Simon Peter, because he's going to be the Rock, and that's kind of funny. But the joke he plays on Satan is the biggest joke of them all. So what happens to understand the humor of the crucifixion, which we don't. That's not a phrase you hear very often. The humor of the crucifixion. What you have to understand is that Satan knew Jesus is God incarnate. Satan knew it, right? He knew it, and he thought, I can kill God. Satan thought, I can kill God. I can get his chosen people to kill him, right? And so what's happening, right? What happens is Jesus up on the cross, right? This isn't a cross, it's a pen. But here's Jesus up on the cross, right? He dies. God throws this huge fit, right? Not fit, but there's an earthquake, there's a tear, and like the temple gets the veil or whatever gets torn into.
Yeah,
right. Huge thing happens. Huge thing occurs. Right. Satan is at the gates of hell, probably celebrating what he thinks is his victory. Satan's looking here. Jesus, and it's kind of like when he's resurrected, or when he resurrects, and it's kind of like one of those heist movies where you sit there and you're like, oh no, it's over, and then it pauses, and it's like, what happened? Like they do a rewind, and Satan's cheering here, and then Jesus opens up the gate, the back door to hell, and lets a bunch of people out. Right, he's just like, "Hey, come on, let's go."
That's funny. So, that's a funny way to look at it. Yeah,
right, and so then it's like, so Satan's like, "Yeah, we won." He turns around, and like almost all of hell is gone, is empty. Right, Jesus empties out the good souls that are trapped in hell. Like that's funny. Right? So you have to, like, when you talk about like,
That's so it's funny to me that you look at that and go, that's really funny because
that,
that's not how I would read it at all.
well, it's
That's
like,
so funny. Maybe I need to pray to cultivate more humor.
well, it's like, so, Jesus comes back, right? And
Yeah.
it's like, he does it, he did it perfectly. Satan thinks Jesus thinks he's losing, but Jesus knows he's winning, right? He's
Mhm.
praying in the garden, he's pleading, he's like, take this cup from me, right? And Satan is gobbling it up, right? He's like, yes, this is it, I've done it. And but Jesus knows he's winning, and he knows he's going to have to suffer for it. So I'm not saying that he didn't want the cup to be taken
Right.
from him, but Jesus knows that this is the winning play, and he's going for it. And Satan falls for it, hook, line, and sinker, right?
Mhm.
And Jesus spends a lot of time just toying with Satan. When you're talking about when you're talking about like the trials that Jesus is given in the desert aren't trials at all. Jesus, he's fine. He's fine the whole time. His human body has hunger, but he knows that he gets his sustenance from God in heaven. And Satan's like, I'm gonna tempt Christ, and Christ just knows it's happening and does it for the purpose of humiliating Satan. Like that's
Okay. So the root for humor and humility,
Mhm.
do they share the same like etymological root?
I believe
Am I
so.
saying that the right way?
Yeah,
Ep-
I think so,
epis- yeah.
but I could be wrong. That would be the second I have to ask.
Now I have to Google.
See, this is why I'm good friends with the Catholic linguist, because I can always ask him, be like, hey, do these share an etymological root? But um, but yeah, so God humiliates Satan, and even to this day, God humiliates Satan, and you can see it if you pay attention to any of like any exorcist that talks about this type of stuff, right? What you hear about is like how easily God humiliates Satan, and like how the faith of a child is enough to drive Satan out of someone, of a possessed person. Like having this faith, um, having this faith in God and just allowing God to work through you, or the times when people have prayed the rosary and Mary comes down from heaven and tosses the demon back into hell. Like these
Hmm.
things that occur um, during exorcisms, where it's just the demons are just constantly humiliated over and over again, and that's just and the exorcist will tell you it pleases God for demons to be humiliated. That's for whatever reason,
This is
God
so
loves it.
interesting. Okay, because now I'm realizing human,
Mhm.
humility, humor, they all share the same etymological root of humus, which means soil, earth, ground, or sod. Um,
That
and
makes
so it's
sense.
like we're all made to be salt of the earth. What
Yes.
on earth?
So
My mind right now, I'm like, okay, it's all coming together. I feel like Inception right now,
mhm.
like
It's
Leonardo
so
DiCaprio right here,
well.
right
So
now.
you see, you're like it's all written from the beginning.
Yes, from the beginning,
It's
our very creation, our very
Yes, and like
personhood.
you
Yes.
look through Genesis, right? And there's
Mhm.
all sorts of parallels. So the 40 days on the boat versus and Jesus 40 days in the desert, right? So Noah spends 40 days surrounded by water. Jesus spends 40 days without any water. Um, but like where God asks Abraham to sacrifice his son, and then at the last minute swaps him out with a lamb. I believe it was a lamb. Maybe it was some other animal, but it swaps him out for a beast.
Mhm.
Um, but the God asked, so like God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son. Abraham would have done it, and so then God sacrifices his son to fulfill fulfill that, like the whole of the Old Testament. Like it's this whole big thing. It's mirrors and parallels and everything. Like that's the story that I think about when I think about the crucifixion. And I was like, God asked for Abraham to sacrifice his son, his beloved son.
Do you think it's funny?
It's not, that part's not funny, but like there's a humor to it, not necessarily but there's a humor to it. There's something beyond.
Yes, I get
So,
it. The more
you see the beauty in it, right? It's like God says, and at the last minute they God allows him to swap out. God sacrifices his son and does still allow for a last minute swap out, but we the people reject that swap out. We chose Barabbas to be free, but we chose the beast to go free and then sacrifice the son, as opposed to God allowed for allowed for Isaac to keep his son and to sacrifice the lamb instead. And so there's a lot of other crazy things that happen there. But no, like if you look through the Bible, God plays a lot of jokes, and not like you can see these things, and it's a lot of things of just jokes on Satan, where Satan thinks his plan is working and it doesn't, and God comes in or like someone comes in, some good, holy, small person, and ruins everything that Satan has planned. And like God chose for Jesus to come in, and the prophecy says, that Jesus would be the king, right? And so Satan looks for a king, right? And but because the line of David was thought to have gone, Satan doesn't really look necessarily there, and like just he misses all of his opportunities because God's always 3 steps ahead. And the human being that is just human, not human and divine, that defeats Satan is Mary, who is this little girl in the backwaters of this Roman land, right? And she's 12 years old, and she beats Satan. Like, how funny is that?
Humility, and it is humorous. Yeah, yes. because it's God comes to us incarnate as an infant, born from the womb of this young girl, and he's as little as possible, and yet he conquers Satan. Yeah, I get what you're saying. It is very funny. And so it is, and then of course, and now I just keep going back to the fact that all of these things share that same root of being of the soil. Yep. Being grounded. Yeah. And that's real what humor is. And that's why humor is important right now. I think we need to be grounded as a church, and we need to stop worrying about everything. Pray, hope, and don't worry, as St. Padre Pio would say. I love him so much. He's like on my.
He was funny. He was a funny guy too.
He was funny, and he wasn't afraid of the truth, but yeah, he was grounded. And of course, yeah, it's interesting to say that too when you look at St. Philip Neri, who is levitating and things like that. Again, it's humorous.
Well, so Padre Pio was the Philip Neri before. It was the Philip, because every generation has this. So like Padre Pio was the Philip Neri, and then taking over for him was Fulton Sheen became the Philip Neri of that time, because Padre Pio was very funny. So there's a story about how they were going to bomb his monastery, and then he's levitating. So and then he appears in the clouds, and then they land instead of bombing, and he meets the person. He's like, "Oh, so you're the one who's going to kill us all."
Yes, I remember reading that story.
It's a funny story. It's like, but that's like the humor that he has. It's the humor of the saints. The saints. You can't be a saint without having joy. And like, there's some more dour saints out there, but yeah, you have to. Yes, you do have to laugh at all of it, and that's for me. Humor is the audacity of joy in a world full of sorrow. Right? The world is full of sorrow, but you have the audacity to have joy within this world that is otherwise supposedly filled with sorrow. Everything is stacked against you right now. Like, talking about a Catholic, everything is stacked against you. The government doesn't like you. Many church people, many people in the church hierarchy, they don't like you.
Yeah.
Other religions don't like you. Like you have like non-denominational Protestant Christians talking about like, yeah, we should all work together except for Catholics.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it is really like that. Like I'll be any sort of Protestant, just anything but Catholic. Yeah.
Right. So like everyone in the world like hates Catholics. And and you can say whatever you want about a Catholic. It's not like, because there are some other religious groups that, have been historically hated for a long time, but you can't say anything about them. But you can say whatever you'd like about a Catholic. You can walk up to a Catholic priest and just call him a pedophile, and no one would.
Well, you can dress up as priests as pedophile priests or pregnant nuns.
Right. And that's
for Halloween. And that's funny.
That's something that you can do.
Yeah.
So, and that kind of segues nicely into the different types of, like, there's humor, and then there's like things that are funny that aren't humorous, where it's like the vulgarities get a chuckle, but they're not humorous. They don't see beyond. They just showcase what is.
Yeah, and vulgarity, if you have to resort to
you've lost
vulgarity, you're not funny. Like, you're just not witty. You lack, like, to be witty, there's a quickness involved, and it is an intellectual thing. I mean, it's you have to be firing on all cylinders and ordered towards that. Like, the funniest people I know are actually some of the smartest people I know, and they think quickly on their feet, and that's what makes it so funny, because they know how to land a joke without hurting people's feelings, without being a jerk, and without being vulgar.
You need to be funny. You need to be kind, and you need to have humor. You need to have the holiness and the humorousness to be able. You need to see beyond, right? You need to see beyond what you would normally say is the reality, and focus on the other parts of it, the spirituality of life, in order for humor to be funny. Anyone can go on a podcast and just say terrible things. Like, I could come on here and just sit here and ramble off, 85 slurs against women, right? And that in some circles would get me thousands of followers and lots of likes and everything. I could be but that's not humor. That's just being mean. Like, Satan is mean, right?
Because he wants to cut people down, and he wants to whittle away at their dignity and their self-confidence. And that's why sarcasm can be really dangerous. That's not always very funny. It's really interesting, because people think sarcasm is funny sometimes, but it is another coping mechanism that usually cuts people down.
Yeah. So your goal in a good joke is a good joke, right? And you can use it to give a rib hit to someone, right? But you don't want to use. You spelt my name wrong, Trad Dad says. V for victory. You don't want to use humor to just go after someone. And there's a thing, like, you can do that with someone when you have respect for each other, right? If you don't have respect for each other, then you can't make a joke, or at least you have to respect the person.
Yeah.
Right. They might not have to respect you, but if you respect the person, then you can try, like, point something out that might be weird or odd, or like that, in order to try to make things better. Which I'm doing this as kind of a really bad segue into the sketch you want to show.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. Okay. So I couldn't download it. I guess I'll give it a little preface. As we all know, Catholic Twitter is a really interesting place. And as of late, there's been a lot of commentary centered around relationships between men and women, and what that relationship ought to look like. But not only that, how to enter into those relationships in the first place. And we are very grateful to some of our betters that they have put together a matchmaking service. And I thought it was brilliant to see Steven put together a little skit talking about this matchmaking service. Do you have any commentary that you'd like to add to that before I show it?
I have nothing but respect for all parties involved and enjoy just a little bit of humor.
Yes. I'm going to share my screen because I couldn't download it.
See, you should have told me before. I have all of them.
Obviously. Do you? Yeah, obviously. Yes, I should have. Let's see here. Share screen. Oh. Yes. Okay. I'm going to share this. Can you see it?
I can.
Okay, perfect.
Up here.
Working on something.
You know you have kids that like to see their father on occasion. Besides, it's like 8 o'clock at night. Are you done for the day?
With normal work, yes. This is a side project to make some extra money.
Like the farm? Or the sitcom studio? Or the audiobook work?
Hey, I didn't hear you complain when I got you that mink coat.
Monk coat. It was a knockoff from China. Made with 100% monkfish fur. Monkfish don't have fur.
All the more impressive, I'd say.
All right, what's the latest scheme?
Matchmaking. It's a very lucrative business.
But you don't know anything about women.
I've been married for 10 years. I should know something.
All that means is that I don't know anything about making good choices.
It'll be fine. We just get some money from guys and set them up with some women.
We? You're dragging Miles into this too?
What? No. 2 dudes doing a matchmaking service? That's weird. This is going to be a you and me thing.
Well, it'll be nice to spend some more time with you. What do I have to do?
Well, since you're a woman, I was thinking you'd be a good spokesperson.
That works.
And you could review the men's applications.
Uh-huh.
And find women to match them with.
So, all of it?
No, not all. Well, yes.
You do realize that we have 6 kids running around, and I'm going to have another one in like a week.
I figured you could do it when you're kind of not doing anything, like a part-time job.
Oh, so now you want your wife to become a wage slave? What will your tratty friends think? Word gets out, we'll lose our parking spot at the TLM. I like our parking spot.
Fine. I'll just farm it out to a random podcast host.
Good. Hurry up and come downstairs. The kids want to play air hockey, and my pregnant belly is done getting hit by pucks.
I'll be down in a minute. Hey, Tim, good buddy. Have I got an idea for you?
Oh, man. That was so funny. Oh, okay. The part about how weird it would be for 2 guys to do that was hilarious. That part killed me.
I mean, I think it is weird for 2 guys to do a matchmaking service. I have been apparently it's super successful. So could if it's successful, good luck to you. I just think it's weird to do that. And part of it is but yes, we did get an air hockey table. So yeah, I mean, it's one of those where there's just a lot of discussion about it. And sometimes you can use humor. I'm clearly not punching down because
no.
Significantly more powerful than I am, and showed up on my Twitter feed at one point to very, very prominently display that.
Oh, that's so funny. Hey, Nicholas. I'm just finally getting back into a schedule with my own podcast, so we'll talk after the show about getting our show back on Meaning of Catholic.
Okay. So, but I mean, it's all just about it's Catholic Twitter, Catholic social media, all of it's kind of a weird space. Mm-hmm. And there's humility. It would do really well there for some people to say, like, if someone came out with a 2 dudes matchmaking service and came out and said, you know what, I understand that it's weird to do a 2 dudes matchmaking service, but we think that this is why it would be good, as opposed to, I think it's weird. Oh, well, you're dumb for thinking it's weird, right? There's this, like, you should be able to poke fun at people and still have respect for that person. Where we get into problems is when you're not poking fun and have respect for that person, but when you are not, you don't respect that person at all, and you're just attacking them.
Trad Dad says, aka Jake.
I know Jake.
Humility of Heart was amazing. Must read for those on Twitter. Probably just Catholics in general. And I haven't read it yet, but I would imagine, or even doing a litany of humility, that also would do. I think we would all do well praying the litany of humility. The danger is, of course, that when you start praying for things, then God gives you more opportunities for those things, like patience. If you pray for patience, you get more opportunities to exercise patience. So be careful what you pray for.
Oh, there's a great Fulton Sheen story where he talks about how he was at Lourdes and he said, "God, give me enough suffering to save just one soul." And then he goes to try to leave, and his they say that his visa isn't good, like his visa expires or something like that. And there's nothing wrong with it, so he has to go back to his hotel. And then it happens like 3 days in a row. And on the third day, he runs into a woman who was supposed to be traveling to Europe with her friends, and he asks if he can just chat with her, and he ends up talking with her for a long time, and she misses where she's going to go, and then has to leave like the next day, and all of her friends end up dying in a car crash, and she survives because she stayed back to talk with him. But he's saying like and he was able. I don't know if she converted or anything, but he was saying like when you say a prayer like that, you better be careful, because those are the prayers that get answered. And so yeah, there's a lot of he has a lot of good stories like that. But that was just like when you pray for humility, God will give you opportunities to be humble, right? And so that gives you opportunities also to defy that humility and to try to be prideful. Yeah. I didn't want to say that she converted and be wrong on this, because this is on the record.
The traditional Thomist says she converted. It must be true.
Okay, but yeah. So when it comes down to it, right? We do need humility, and what we really need to do is to make sure that we don't let any of the fame and fortune that may come our way to go to our heads, right? There's definitely bad things that can happen to you if good things are happening to you, right? So if, let's say tomorrow, right, someone came to me and said, "Hey, Catholic Comedy, we love what you're doing. We'd like to give you a giant bag of money so that you could do this as a full-time career thing." I'd probably have to say no, because I can't do this as a full-time career thing, because I know that's going to corrupt what I'm doing here, right? I would love my initial goal was just to convince some of the talking heads to take like one of their shows a month and talk about joy, just one, right? And Taylor Marshall's wife is named Joy, so he could have gotten off on a technicality.
He was going to talk about Joy and how much he loves her.
Right.
How amazing she is.
But it was very like they don't listen unless you're fighting them. So instead, I'm going on every podcast that wants me to just talk about this. So and I listen to your other podcast that you're talking about, like the difficulties in the trad podcasting world and everything. And I mean, that's where I was really struck, like, yeah, because I think more people are getting it, right? Like, and the difficulty is to not become what we're fighting against, because there have been some attempts made to start something that's going to promote humor and joy that has just turned into two guys and a microphone type of podcasting, right? And it's not what we'd want to get into. It's not what I want to do. Like, I don't want to be like, I very specifically am not doing a podcast. I'm doing sketch comedy, right? Because like I'll go on other people's podcasts, but I don't want to end up being that two guys and a microphone, or one guy and one guy.
So you do have a friend that does this with you. Then you sort of It's alluded to in the skit that
Miles, yes,
Miles,
whose name is not Miles, and who wants to remain anonymous.
Okay. And how often are you and Miles recording? I want to point people to your website and make sure people are connecting with you on Twitter and your website. How often are you and Miles creating content?
So, I mean, we used to. It's much harder now because he got married, and had a baby, and so things are like
That
a
puts
little.
a wrench in things.
I know
Yeah,
it does.
a little
It does
bit.
put a wrench in things, and so it's like I got some sketches, and that's the whole Paul Rugg sketch. Is that Paul Rugg was being hired to replace him for a time, but I have some other things that that I've already had pre-recorded from him. So what I do is the method here to my madness is I'll come in here and I'll write like 3 or 4 sketches. I have like a Notepad plus thing, and I'll come in here and I'll come up with an idea and I'll just write down a couple of sketches, and I'll have this the one of them that I really want to record is called Gondor, and I'll sit there and I'll put like a title in there and I'll start writing out, and then I'll figure out what I'm going to do with it. And sometimes I'll just have like a single line written, and sometimes I'll be able to like punch out a whole sketch.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm done writing a sketch, I will then save it and I will email it to anyone who wants to do the voices on
To
it.
Paul Rugg.
Well, he's one. So Paul Rugg is a great guy and is very personable. And so this is the cool story. This is one of those things that brought me a lot of joy. When I was a kid, I loved Freakazoid. I watched the show and everything. And then when I became an adult and it came on DVD, I bought the DVDs and I listened to the director's commentary and everything like that. So I'm fairly well acquainted with.
You've been into comedy for a long time.
Oh yeah. So I made a post, and I made a post on Twitter. It was some sort of random, like, about joy and humor and whatnot. And then I see it was liked by Paul Rugg. I'm like,
No.
Hold on. First, let me make sure. So I do like I click, and he's got the check mark and everything, and he's Paul Rugg, and I'm like, and he's following me, but I'm not following him. Like, this is
No
wrong.
way.
I didn't know.
Way.
I didn't know that he had a Twitter and anything. So I follow him and I sent him a message like, "Hey, Paul Rugg, I'm a huge fan of yours." And so, it's like, oh, and he's like, "Hey, yeah, nice to meet you." Like, if you ever want to do any sketch comedy work, I do this audio sketch comedy thing. If you want to be. And so he's like, "Yeah, sure." So I send him over some scripts. He's like, "Yeah, no, I love it. I'll do it." So he did. So in the Unhaunted House, which is another one that.
Okay, so this is amazing. I didn't realize like he legit was doing that with you. I thought it was like a shtick.
No, like so.
That's
so
amazing.
He's going to be at the next festival. I'm flying him out. So
Wait, is he Catholic? Like,
yes,
I didn't realize he was Catholic.
He is very
I
Catholic.
know
He
nothing. I know
he taught
nothing.
a screenwriting class at Catholic, I think at John Paul the Great University or something like that. So
oh my goodness! Wow.
He's Catholic. He just did a great interview with Chris Lawrence, No More Heroes podcast, where he talks about his whole career and everything like that. So I mean, that is he's just a really nice guy, right? And so
it's like just so funny.
Yeah, so I sent him he sent me audio for 2 of the sketches. He's doing like a bunch of going around doing convention stuff. So hopefully he can send me audio for some other sketches that I've sent him. And I'm hoping that it all gets, that we get to do a lot more stuff. But like, yeah, he's legit. He's legit, and he's a cool guy. And so another kind of. So he's just a guy who knew who I was and like was following me. And I was like, "You're a famous person. What are you doing?" Like, I'm a schlub.
Idiot.
Yeah, I'm a schlub. What's going on here? And so and then there's another time Jen Fulwiler, she came to town.
Oh yeah.
And so I went to go see it, and afterwards she did like a meet and greet with anyone who wanted to. So I brought a Catholic comedy mug and I gave it to her, and she's like, "You're Catholic comedy. I heard about you. You're doing good things." I'm like, "I'm sorry, what?"
And that's why you're like, and this is why I don't put my name out there.
Well, so yeah, I mean, I was on a work call and someone asked me to stay behind for one of our customers said, "Hey, could you stay behind the call?" I said, "Okay." I was thinking, they want me to ask me to do something extra, blah, blah, blah. It happens all the
Mhm.
time. I stay behind and they say, "Are you Catholic comedy?" And I was like, "Yes." This is either I'm going to get in trouble or this is good. She's like, my kid was at a youth group and they were playing some of your sketches. And I was like, "Oh, thanks, Shelps, for ruining that." I have a thing about coffee.
You don't like coffee?
Okay, man.
All right.
So coffee. Okay, coffee
First of all, how dare you?
was brought.
I don't even know what you're going to say, but I feel like it's offensive to coffee, and so I need to say something.
Coffee was brought to Europe in, I believe it was 1515, and the Protestant Reformation happened in 1516. It was like the year before the Protestant Reformation coffee happens. Now, I know you'd say the French Revolution and Bastille Day, or the storming Bastille, was planned in a coffee shop. The downfall of Christianity in Europe is directly correlated with the introduction of coffee into Europe.
Purely coincidental.
And tea, okay, tea saved Japan from, and this is directly.
And America.
Well,
sorry.
Tea saved Japan from paganism.
I agree. Prepping for heaven is not related whatsoever.
So Japan, so the Japanese tea ceremonies were designed by a Catholic who designed them in a way that they looked in silhouette. So from a shadow, it looked exactly like the Mass. So when the pagan rulers of Japan tried to stomp out Catholicism, well, it was the height of rudeness to interrupt a tea ceremony, so you couldn't. The guards would never interrupt a tea ceremony, and since they looked exactly the same as a mass, Catholic masses were held in tea houses, so that they could get. So that's why the Catholicism survived in Japan. Now they didn't have any access to the Vatican, and I think there's Christian missionaries came to Japan, after a while, and like they were like, "Hey, do you want to learn about Catholicism?" And the people of Japan were like, "Yeah, what do you want to know?" Like, because they had kept the tradition alive in these tea houses for so long before. Yeah, so there's a lot of cool stuff that has to do with tea. So that's why tea saved Catholicism in Japan. Coffee ruined Christianity in Europe. I
am going to just disagree with you on everything because I don't want to admit that I could be wrong. So
it was something that I started as a joke just because I don't like coffee. But the more I looked into it, the more like, there's something there. Because you think about it, like tea is something
I love coffee. I live on coffee in the morning with my kids. Does your wife drink coffee? Is she
yeah.
She's a heathen, in other words?
She's a heathen, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
But think about it, though. How addicted are you to coffee?
No, I get horrible headaches.
Anything that you
real.
have an unhealthy addiction to is something you need to get rid of, even if it's otherwise.
I don't know. I listen to Father Gregory Pine, and I don't know. I like to take a little bit better. Everyone go to Pints of the Aquinas and watch Father Gregory Pine talk about addiction and coffee. It's a good one.
I'm just saying, like, it's one of those things where people are truly addicted to it. And it's one of those where, like, it allows you to work much more than you would normally. You
have outed yourself as a Sedeve contest, so I think I have to kick you off my show now.
No, I am not a Sede, although I do know some nice Sedes.
I do too. I do too.
Oh no, so yeah, I make it a point to still stay in communication with people that I vehemently disagree with, especially on the coffee issue. So, but yeah, it's I mean,
very
it's fine.
of you.
It's fine generally,
It's
I just
fine that you're wrong. It's okay. You can be wrong about this.
I know that it's a very sensitive subject for a lot of people.
It is.
So, but I mean, it otherwise, like if you can manage it well, whatever. I'm just saying that there's a weird correlation. If you look in the history of coffee and then the
I don't wanna
decline
look at the
of
history.
Christianity in Europe, there's like coffee is introduced, and it was something that was so Kennedy Hall said it was like a trophy of war from the Crusades. So we brought it over from like it was a big thing in Islam. We bring it over to Europe, and then Europe just collapses in. And I think it was the full-bodied smoke of Satan that
The steam of coffee.
yeah, it's the full-bodied smoke of Satan.
Oh my
is
goodness. Is that why
But-
they have a French roast?
yeah, maybe you know it's
Maybe there's something there. The daughter of the church that left France. How dare you?
yeah, and that's all because of coffee.
It's all coffee's fault. Well, I guess we'll leave it there at that. But if you have anything else, do you have anything else to add? Where can people find you, follow you, connect with you and your work? I'd love for people to be able to do that.
Go to CatholicComedy.com. That's where I put my stuff up there. You can follow me on Twitter at Catholic_comedy. I'd also will post stuff on Facebook and Instagram, but that's just the sketches. So if you go to CatholicComedy.com, you see all of it. I'm not super concerned with the number of views that I get on any particular platform, so I can spread it out to everything so people have access to it. I just want people to have more joy in their lives. Is the real goal here. Is I just want you to have fun, and to go support some of my friends, like the Catholic Linguist. There's Chris Lawrence, who did No More Heroes podcast, I think is his Twitter handle, and he posts out some stuff. Paul Rugg's a real nice guy. Give him a follow. He does.
Rugg.
Paul
I'm
Rugg.
excited. I'm so excited to learn more about Paul Rugg.
He's really great.
I seriously thought the whole thing was a joke.
No.
like making fun of Paul Rudd.
To be sure, it is a fictionalized version of Paul Rugg. Paul Rugg himself as far as I'm aware, does not have a giant yacht and a golden palace. So, but yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, I mean, we're all just trying to have a good time, and I would love for you all to just enjoy, right? Find something you enjoy, and then try to cultivate that joy in others. If any of you has the ear of anyone who is more important than me, which I gotta imagine some of you do, right? Like if any of you is like, hey, you know what? I sit with. I have lunch with Matt Fradd every day or something like that. I should talk.
Thursday. I don't know why Thursday would ever watch anything. I do, but
like just try to introduce them to the idea of more joy in what they're doing, more joy and love and humor, and less of the fear and anger and hatred. Because that's what we need in our life is joy and humor and love. So
it's part of being human.
Part of being human is humor and humility. And so yeah, and if any of them want to, if anyone wants to work with me on a sketch or something like that, feel free to send. My DMs are open, and I'm always looking for some talent. But if you don't have talent, please don't make me be in an awkward situation where I'm like, thanks for your recording. I'm doing something else.
You guys, please flood his inbox with like really weird, funny, awkward things. I would love it. So
great. Awesome.
Well, thanks again for coming on to Integrated. I'm so glad that I was able to have you on for a live show tonight. And like I said, you can check the description. Whoever is watching this, check the description for ways to connect with Stephen from Catholic Comedy. And if you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe. I always forget to ask people to do that. And it really helps a lot with just getting other people to find out about this work. And if we're talking about people needing more joy, more integration, I think this podcast, and my hope is that this podcast would help people do that. So I would really appreciate your help spreading the word about all of the things that are going on here and being able to share the amazing content that Stephen is doing. So thank you so much for joining us. God bless you, and St. Philip Neri, ora pro nobis.